Welcome to the Hidden Potential Podcast. I'm your host, Homer Hargrove, and today we're going to be talking about how to balance grace and accountability as a leader. You know, leadership is this constant balancing act. On one side, you want to extend grace because life happens, people make mistakes, growth takes time. You want to be a reasonable leader, right? And on the other side, you need to hold your team accountable because without these clear expectations, goals don't get met, standards start to slip, and people get frustrated. And at the end of the day, this challenge is that if you lean too far into grace, your team not only will lack this idea of discipline or structure, but they'll end up getting frustrated with one another when one person seems like they're in this greasy place of not meeting the standard while the other ones are working hard. And if you lean too far into accountability, you can create this environment of pressure and fear instead of motivation and growth. You know, how do you balance both? I think the question of how do you create this culture where people feel supported, yet they still know that this idea of excellence matters. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, how to lead with both grace and accountability in a way that strengthens your team instead of weakening it. So let's dive in. We're going to talk about 5 key principles to help you balance grace and accountability as a leader. Let's start with number 1, and that is set clear expectations from the start. You know, one of the biggest reasons that leaders struggle with balancing grace and accountability is because expectations were never necessarily made clear in the first place. And if your team doesn't know what the standard is, then they don't know what they're really being held accountable to. And that's not their fault. That falls back on us as the leader. We can't have these unspoken expectations. You know, grace doesn't mean ignoring mistakes, and accountability doesn't mean punishing people when they fall short. It means clearly defining what success looks like and making sure that your team can understand what's expected from day one. You know, with even like this idea of a general concept of how we work to even specific staff roles of knowing what a win is. And think about it like this. If you're coaching say a basketball team and you never explain the rules of the game, you can really get upset when a person dribbles out of bounds. And you know, at the end of the day, it's the same for leadership. You know, if people can't meet expectations that they don't know exist, it's not their fault that you didn't explain the rules from the beginning. You know, we should regularly communicate expectations in a way that's simple, that's specific, that's measurable, instead of saying, let's improve communication, or we should say, going forward, I want us as a team to respond to emails within 24 hours. See how it's much more defined than let's improve this, let's do better. And when expectations are clear, accountability feels fair rather than frustrating, and especially when everyone is able to be on the same page. Now, let's go to number 2, and that is lead with empathy, but stay consistent. You know, empathy is one of the most powerful tools in leadership because it's able to inspire people. It helps people to feel really connected when it comes to like, this is part of like their life. You know, it's not just a job that they go to, but it's where they're spending most of their life is with our workplaces. So to understand that life happens, family emergencies, even just burnout, personal struggles, as a leader, it's important for us to show your team that they are valued as people, not just workers. And that's where that grace comes in. But grace doesn't mean inconsistency either. If you make exceptions for one person and not the other, or if you allow poor performance to slide too often, to where it's like this habit of poor performance, then it starts to erode the trust and fairness within your team and leadership. You know, this key is knowing when to extend grace and when to reinforce that standard. You know, taking an idea like this, like say someone is struggling, and what would be better is to ask what is going on before assuming what is going on. You know, are they consistently dropping the ball because they don't care? Or is it because they're feeling overwhelmed? Or like, dude, like, are they going through depression? Are they missing deadlines because they're lazy or because they need clear direction? Maybe they genuinely don't understand something that they're doing. They don't even realize that you're upset with them. they think they're doing a great job. When you approach accountability with empathy, you're able to address the real issue instead of treating the symptoms. So if it is something like going on in their lives, then you can feel empathy for that and help them to, and it's like as a leader, reach in to offer some type of support for that struggle, and they will perform better at work. If it's like, say they're going through a family difficulty, maybe someone's in the hospital or something like that, and if you just go in hot saying like, hey, you've been slipping on this, you've been slipping on that, you better fix it or you're getting fired. Now you just added to whatever they're struggling with. Now they're not only is there, say, a family member in the hospital or whatever, but now they're also in fear and jeopardy of their job, and their morale just got knocked way lower. So you're not actually going to really get better out of them. You're going to most likely get worse. But if you go in with this different attitude, like by saying, hey, I noticed that you missed this deadline, or I noticed that you've been coming in late, whatever, is there something going on? Are you okay? And that invites conversation. You're making a clear observation, like, hey, this has been going on like this several times now. It seems like something's up. Is something going on, or has it been? And they'll with that kind of approach, they will most likely tell you the truth. Like, hey, I've just been feeling unmotivated. I feel like I don't know the direction of my life. And, it could be maybe like a dramatic thing they're going through internally just with them. Or they might say something like, yeah, my mom's in the hospital and I've been having to go back and forth and getting home really late because of visiting her. You get to start paint more of a picture to where you're able to really have a lot more insight when it comes to addressing the situation, and you will be able to better navigate like that idea of grace and accountability, and even offer them some type of support or action to be able to move forward. Now let's talk about number 3, which is holding people accountable to growth, not perfection. And this is the idea that accountability isn't just about catching mistakes. It's about developing people. It is so much better to develop somebody that is already with your organization than to hire outside for that new position. If your team only hears from you when something goes wrong, they'll start to associate accountability with fear instead of growth. But true accountability isn't about punishment. It's also about progress. It's about even being able to celebrate those wins. And it's about making sure that your team is constantly is in this path and journey of improving and reaching that potential. That means holding people to that means holding people to those standards, but it also means giving them the tools, the feedback, and support that they need to meet it. Your heart is for them to grow. It's not about being perfect. It's like, I want this leader, this employee, this volunteer, whatever, I want them to grow. And if a team member keeps struggling with a certain task, instead of you just telling them that they need to do better, maybe you could be asking them what resources or support would help you to improve in this area. What can I do to help you be better at this task, at this role, at this job? What tools can I give you? And this shifts the accountability from being about blame to being about solutions. We want to build a culture where accountability is seen as a tool for growth, not something that people are afraid of. It's not something that makes people question whether or not they're going to have their job. We want our team to know that when they fall short, the goal is to learn and adjust, not to be shamed or punished. Now let's go into number 4, and we're almost done. Address issues early instead of letting them build up. That saying, like, don't sweep it under the rug. When we do that it will only continue to grow into this bigger bump under the rug to where someone's going to trip over it. And it's this idea of avoiding addressing a problem because you don't want to seem too harsh. And when we do that, it often only gets worse. It doesn't go away. That's what happens when we lean too far into that grace without reinforcing accountability. And ignoring small issues, it they will only grow over time. And if you notice a pattern of lateness, of missed deadlines, or a lack of engagement, don't wait until it becomes this major issue that you have to bring up. The longer that you wait, the harder the conversation becomes. And what could have been this like small course correction, where we can just make a 2 millimeter shift this way, you're doing great, but in this area we need to do better. It now turns into this big deal to where not only is it something that is probably between you feeling frustrated and the work output, but other people on the team are probably feeling frustrated as well, and they're going to get frustrated at you for not fixing this problem, for not addressing this employee or volunteer, whatever. The key is to correct in real time instead of waiting until things are just out of control. You want to give feedback early and often instead of waiting for this big review, our annual review, and then we're going to talk about it. You want to make those small corrections along the way. A simple, hey, I noticed that this isn't quite where it needs to be. Let's adjust now so that it doesn't become a bigger issue later. Just simply say that. And it can prevent a lot of unnecessary tension. You don't have to constantly feel like you're being a bad guy for wanting to help your team get better. That leads us into our last point, which is model what you expect from your team. This is probably the most important thing, and that is, at the end of the day, the best way to balance that grace and accountability is to be the example. If you want your team to work hard, take responsibility, and meet deadlines, then they need to see you doing the same. They have to see it from you first. And a leader who is demanding but inconsistent will lose respect of your team. And a leader who is overly gracious but lacks discipline will create an environment where excellence isn't a priority, where people are constantly frustrated, and it will end up creating like gossip in the workplace as people don't have an outlet to process these frustrations that they're going through. But a leader who models both hard work and understanding, that is a person that they would want to follow. And when you come to give them correction on something, they'll be able to respect that because they see you as that example, that you're not asking them to do something you wouldn't be willing to do yourself. And if you expect your team to take that feedback well, how do you respond when someone gives you constructive criticism? If you want your team to show up on time and prepared, do you do the same? The way that you lead sets the tone for how your team approaches both grace and accountability. The idea of like that constructive criticism part, if you have a team member that brings something to your attention and you kind of brush it off like, well, I'm the one in charge. Well, I'm the boss, so I didn't ask your opinion. If you get all snarky because you're insecure and defensive, well, how do you think they're going to receive it when you try to give them something? You should be able to receive it with grace, say, thank you for bringing that to my attention. I didn't realize I was doing that. It's just like, just be a person. You don't have to have this idea of pretending that you have it all together or pretending that you're perfect. Ask yourself, would I want to work with someone like me? And if the answer is yes, then great. But if not, what's a small change that you can make to lead in a way that inspires both high performance and strong relationships? So let's recap with these five keys of balancing grace and accountability. 1, we talked about setting clear expectations from the start. People can't meet a standard that they don't know exists. Number 2, lead with empathy, but stay consistent. Give grace when needed, but don't create an uneven playing field. Number 3, hold people accountable to growth, not perfection. Accountability should be about progress, not punishment. And number 4, address issues early instead of letting them build up. The sooner that you correct, the easier the conversation. And finally, number 5, model what you expect from your team. Leadership starts with you. If you want accountability and excellence, you must live it first. Remember, great leadership isn't about being too soft or too strict. It's about knowing when to push, knowing when to support, knowing when to challenge, knowing when to give grace, knowing when to provide accountability. We're about working together, and your team doesn't just perform well, they grow, they thrive, they stay motivated when we as the leader get better. So as we wrap up, I want you to consider this week. Think about one area that you might need to extend more grace, and think about one area that you might need to raise the standard. And leadership isn't about getting it perfect. It's about staying intentional. We are trying to apply what we're talking about today. So that being said, I hope that this episode was meaningful for you. I hope that it made a difference in your leadership, in your organization. Could you do me a favor? Leave me a rating and review on my podcast. It would really help me out and help others be able to see this channel in their feed. But until next time, have a great life. Well, there you have it. I hope that this episode was meaningful and edifying for your leadership and your growth within your ministry and organization. Could you do me a favor? Could you leave a rating and review for this podcast? It'd really help me out and help others be able to see this show in their feed. You can also visit homerhargrove.com to be able to learn more, connect, or become one of our supporters. Until next time, have a great life.